Stop overpaying on your home loan. We understand that managing your finances can be overwhelming, especially as interest rates continue to rise. With access to 70 plus lenders, our team of specialised brokers will find the best rates for your specific needs. Count on us to secure a lower rate swiftly, giving you the confidence you deserve. Book an appointment with one of our experts today to protect your financial well-being and secure your future. Call us now at 02 8866 2444 or visit our website at finny.com.au.
This is a Momentum Media production.
The SMSF Advisor Show. Your expert insights into the biggest themes shaping the SMSF advice industry.
Hi everyone, Aaron Dunn here and welcome to the SMSF Advisor Show. Today I'm joined by my new co-host. So Keith Ford is a journalist at Momentum Media. Welcome aboard, Keith.
Hi Aaron, nice to jump on here for a first episode with you.
Thank you for joining. And yeah, as is always the case with our SMSF Advisor Show, we kick off today taking a look, I should say, at what has been making news within the SMSF sector and across SMSF Advisor. So Keith, I might hand over to you to have a bit of a discussion about what's been making news.
Thank you, Aaron. So there's been a lot of stuff happening in the SMSF space over the last fortnight since the last podcast. One of the big ones is the opening of the consultation for the non-arm's length expense rules, which is obviously a pretty interesting topic.
Yeah, and we've seen this has been, well, it's actually been going for about 6 or 7 years, but I digress. But what we've seen is earlier this year, consultation on this issue, and we saw what the government coined as a factor-based approach to determining how the non-arm's length expenditure rules would apply and be relevant to self-managed super funds. There was a bit of conjecture about that decision. They've decided to exclude APRA funds from that process. But then ultimately, post that initial consultation, we then saw in the federal budget the government make some further changes to that factor from, I guess, being a factor of 5 down to a factor of 2. So now what we're seeing is, in essence, the announcement that we saw in the federal budget now turn into consultation from Treasury with a view that this would intend to become law try to get it in play, in essence, as soon as possible, noting that we do have the ATO's general compliance relief available through until the 30th of June 2023. So the idea is that they're trying to probably find some middle ground between a level of concessional treatment that would be available than where we currently sit with legislation from the ATO's compliance guidance around taxing all of the fund's income at 45%. So this 2 times factor approach in the ATO's view is kind of this happy medium in their view. The industry is not necessarily that rapt about it, in particular where there's been a lot of discussion about how it applies to APRA funds equally to self-managed super funds. We now have 2 different sets of rules in this one area applying to APRA funds and SMSFs. And that is something that's probably rubbed a few people up the wrong way, including myself, especially when you actually talk about some of the budget things and the $3 million cap, and they want to create a uniform approach, yet in the exact same approach here, they're creating 2 different sets of rules for APRA and SMSF. So I've got on my high horse, as you can probably hear, and I'll do this quite often in these podcasts. But yeah, that is a bit of guidance. I guess most importantly, we're going to get some clarity. We might not like it, but we move forward, and therefore we need to understand what clients are impacted, how they're going to be impacted, and then move on.
Right. And I guess they've already moved from 5 to 2. So that's kind of made it a little pill a little easier to swallow. Yeah,
a little bit. But yeah, like I said, just the disconnect between, in the federal budget where you ultimately say with this $3 million threshold, we need a uniform set of rules for APRA funds and self-managed funds. They don't really want to listen to any other argument when SMSFs could do something different, pay their share. And then in the exact same set of budget papers, they create an entirely different set of rules for APRA funds and self-managed funds. and argue the case on the basis that they should be different, when collectively for 5 years they've been working together to try and get resolution on this topic. So, yeah, they're the things that are pretty frustrating in the industry.
Right. It certainly sounds like it.
Yeah.
The second piece of news that we wanted to look at today was the LRBA loan facility rate increasing to 8.85%.
Yeah, so this is a fairly substantial jump. So what we've seen with related party borrowings with our self-managed super fund clients is that the ATO in their safe harbour set that rate in May each year based upon the RBA indicator rates for residential investor housing loans for investors. So that rate in essence creates a fixed rate each and every year. So 5.35% for the last 12 months has been fine, but we've seen interest rates continue to climb over the past year. So now we've hit that May of 2023 date with interest rates. And we've now seen that huge shift in the increase in that rate from what was 5.35 to 8.85%. So that's going to have a fairly profound impact on repayments for SMSF clients. And I know, in some of the discussion I've had with Miranda in the past is we kind of were flagging this as an issue, but we hadn't seen the release of that. There's going to be some fairly substantial challenges for not only repayment in the fund, but potentially for those that are using contributions coming into the fund to help support the payments. If you've also got competing demands sitting on the outside, in your personal environment with increased rates and the impact on debt outside of the fund as well. So I reckon it's going to create a pretty significant challenge for those that have related party loans in play to make sure that they comply and make sure that they adjust that rate and the repayment terms once we hit that new financial year.
Right. So we've also got the next kind of topic was the ATO's focus, I guess we would say, on SMSFs and property development projects.
Yeah, so this is something where the ATO, when they start to see things happening in the marketplace, they'll flag concerns. And they do that through these taxpayer alerts. And we've seen the ATO with these closely held groups looking at the way in which profits are being diverted and looking through structures, ultimately to try and get the self-managed super fund to end up with profits from those projects and then ultimately have that concessionally taxed. So the ATO's released this taxpayer alert 2023-2 that flags their concerns about that very issue. So where profits of the property development enterprise are diverted into the self-managed super fund using a special purpose vehicle that's owned by the fund. So you might see some sort of trust arrangement, and then inside that trust, there's another trust that the super fund owns 100% of the units through. And the ATO will look through those arrangements and say, well, actually, you've entered into a scheme here where this shouldn't have landed in the fund this way if it was done on commercial terms. And therefore, we will look to address this from an income tax point of view. And then, if there are any other SIS compliance points of view and there's gnarly issues there. And noting as well that the ATO did issue a regulators bulletin around property development back in 2021. So that SMSF regulators bulletin 2021/1 that highlights a number of issues with property development. It's not to say that you can't do it, but there are issues around, what we see as related party transactions and related party acquisitions. If you're using borrowing or not using borrowing, you've got tax issues around whether you are doing things on an arm's length basis or not. So again, it's just something that the ATO as regulator is highlighting, and they will use whatever resources they see necessary to ensure that there is absolute compliance to all aspects of both the SIS law and also the tax law.
Right. People need to be careful.
Absolutely.
And so our fourth piece of news that we wanted to look at, something that you certainly know a bit about, being that you've had a recent webinar that discussed this topic. We're looking at the reversionary pension changes that the ATO is looking into.
Yeah, so one of the things that we constantly go back and look at is just what the ATO has as what is advice under development. So what are the issues within superannuation and self-managed super funds that may be relevant? And one of those that we've been waiting on for some period of time is an update to the Commissioner's position within what I call the Bible for pensions, which is the tax ruling 2013/5 around when a pension commences and ceases. So there actually hasn't been any change to that in theory since the budget announcements and the reforms in 2017. We have seen a range of rulings that came out for the changes in the law at that time, but the ATO is intending on updating that document. Now, there was an expectation that that was going to occur in June. There has been some ongoing delays with that document due to other priorities throughout that period of time. But interesting as well is they did have a stated view for some period of time around reversionary pensions and how a reversionary pension can be on foot. And that also relates to whether maybe you can change reversionary pensions as well midstream. And there'd been conversation, I think it was back in 2013, around whether you can change it midstream or not and some mechanics of that. But there's also an argument within some parts of the industry to say, well, you can actually have a pension continue, a reversionary pension continue through the operation of a binding death benefit nomination, which isn't necessarily consistent with the ATO's views that they've had in some of their publications that they've had, both from the reforms point of view and then arguably within that ruling as well. So naturally, I think the ATO is contemplating a range of those issues. But at this stage, we're kind of waiting to see where they land on that. But we are asking as an industry for more and more clarity on these things. And the problem sometimes is when these rulings come out, they're so big that they become problematic when changes occur to try and actually get these fixed up in a timely fashion. And I think, there's a whole range of issues that need to be addressed in it. And therefore, the fact that we're still waiting for these things to occur, we'd like more certainty in the industry of these things. So, getting this finalised hopefully will be a priority of the ATO to get resolved and gives us that certainty that we need to be able to move forward on some of these issues that get debated, each and every day within the SMSF sector.
We've got here Maya, who is the editor of SMSF Advisor, and we are going to talk about the Quality of Advice Review.
Thank you for having me, guys. How are you both?
Very well, thank you. We said certainty. We've finally got something here with the QAR. We probably haven't got everything we want yet, but I'm sure it's a pretty important step forward for the advice industry generally. Mm-hmm. And I look forward to having a bit of discussion about where we've landed and then potentially where we might end up getting to, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Yes, fingers crossed. Well, I might give you guys a quick overview. Obviously, while being the new editor of SMSF Advisor, I have been editing IFA for some time. So obviously, the QAR has been a big sort of point of focus for us on that title. So I'll give you a quick overview. Obviously, last week, there's not many advisors that don't know this, or even accountants for that matter. But on the 13th of June, Financial Services Minister Stephen Jones obviously unveiled the government's anticipated response to the QAR. So we'd been waiting for that to reveal for about 6 months or so. Mm-hmm. So quite some time. And basically what the minister did was pledge his support for 14 of the 22 recommendations made by the QAR lead, Michelle Levy. So basically they're divided into 3 streams, these recommendations that he has accepted. So stream 1 is set to prioritise recommendations that alleviate red tape pressures on advisors. And I understand this is an area that is particularly interesting, Aaron, to SMSF advisors. So among these recommendations is the removal of the fee disclosure statements, the replacement of statements of advice with fit-for-purpose advice records, and the elimination of the safe harbour steps from the best interest duty, among sort of other things. And then we have stream 2, which is dubbed the expanding access to retirement income advice stream, which will basically see superannuation funds expand their provision of advice. And then we come to stream 3, which is those 8 recommendations that the government has yet to accept. So those include, Ms. Levy's recommendation regarding the broader definition of personal advice. So the minister has yet to sort of say how he feels about that one. And then also Ms. Levy's push for the good advice duty. So that's another one that's sort of been placed on ice. So I guess from my perspective, Aaron, what are those recommendations that are most important for SMSF advisors? What have you guys sort of been sitting there and waiting for, I guess?
Oh, well, I guess it's in a few parts because obviously the sector is quite diverse. So, you have many aspects of the advice industry. Well, they're professionals more generally. So you have advice, and then you've obviously got a cohort that is quite buoyant by that, so financial advisors. But equally, you've got a cohort that are quite frustrated in that entire process as well. And I mean that in the context of those that maybe are in a limited license framework, or even the expectation that accountants were going to somehow play a role. And there was as part of the scope originally to look at the tax agent recommendation around the inclusion of accountants in the role. And we've really seen nothing on that.
Yes.
So I think from an SMSF point of view, and in particular with the government's proposed measures with the $3 million introduction of the earnings threshold, there's an opportunity to really look at the way in which this advice process might be able to help those seek advice around those issues. But it also is going to create some problems for the accountants and the limited advice advisors potentially that were really looking for some further clarity to be able to help their clients. And they might be in exactly the same position and problem that they were in 2017 when the clients had to comply with the transfer balance cap back then as well. So I think there's some good news stories and some not so good news or frustration. There's still gaps in the system to deal with. But I think the fact that we can, the fact that advisors will be able to scope it, not have to have, very lengthy, long-winded documents that don't really resonate with the trustee. They want to know what the strategy is. They want to really focus on those things. That can only be a good outcome. That's not only going to help SMSF clients, but it's going to help, those within retail and industry environments as well with their retirement savings.
Yeah, definitely, Aaron. And just a quick one, which might be an ignorant question, but I am new to the space, so forgive me for this one. But advisors and accountants, do they get along? Because I know they weren't a fan of what Michelle suggested regarding accountants.
I guess like all things, the advice industry works really well where they work collaboratively, but there are going to be pockets of the industry that see each other as being higher and mightier than each other.
Yes,
and therefore, the challenge here is there needs to be solutions that will accommodate the various, what's the right word, that stereotypes of SMSF trustees. Okay, so the SMSF Association some time ago did research into behavioural types. So you got your controller behaviour, your outsourcer behaviour, and your coach seeker behaviour. So the outsourcer behaviour will really rely upon an advisor and will look to then the relationship with the accountant, the advisor, to do everything. And therefore, the cohesion of those relationships is crucial, and the client generally is prepared to pay for that. But it's when you start to get into this coach seeker pocket, which is where people have enough information, do the due diligence themselves. They might just want strategic advice, not investment advice. This is where things get a little bit more frosty and you're trying to work out who's doing what. And that's where people can overstep that and they don't scope it well enough. And the current framework does create problems in itself. And I don't know if you've seen anything about the Law Reform Commission work that's being done at the moment. There was a publication recently. It was referred to as SMSFs as misfits. Right.
Yes.
So there is a huge issue with the construct of the Corporations Act and how advice can be applied in here, because it has overlays of tax, but it's a financial product. And so who's who in the zoo is a real challenge. And it's that lack of clarity that equally creates the friction in this space as well.
Definitely, Aaron. And Keith, we've obviously, behind the scenes, we've been receiving all the responses, the various responses to the QAR, and among them, obviously, the SMSFA. They sort of welcomed the first phase of the QAR response, but they did say they would like to see more clarity on whether the government is going to agree to extend or broaden the definition of personal financial advice, as we sort of all would love to get more clarity on that. What was Peter Burgess saying about that, Keith?
Right. So first of all, as you mentioned, Aaron, documentation, any ability to streamline this, everyone's on board with it. Well, mostly everyone. Some comments every here and there are against, but generally speaking, people don't like the SOAs at the moment. Very burdensome, tough to kind of comply with, and not really a a consumer-centric document,
Yeah.
I guess, is the general consensus. In terms of the safe harbor steps, that's also something that Peter Burgess said was a good move. He was pretty happy with that. But yeah, in terms of documentation, I think that's, firstly, it's the only real part that's got any kind of clarity so far.
Yes. Yeah.
And then it's everything that's to come that is up in the air that people just want the answers to. And we've been waiting and everyone wants to know. So
Yeah.
I guess with the next lot of changes that are eventually going to happen and the recommendations that haven't been brought on, I guess how could those affect the SMSF advisor space?
Good advice and personal advice and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, for me, this is all about, and I know I heard Michelle on several occasions talk about the fact that we want to be moving away from prescriptive things. So, you look at the safe harbor steps and it kind of got to this, I've got to tick a box, I've got to tick a box, I've got to tick a box, into moving into something that is professional standards, and the way in which that work can be done allows advisors and professional advice to be fluid in what needs to occur in a client's life. And we are driven by events that happen in life. We go through life and we'll start pensions, and we make contributions, and we might need insurances and all these sorts of things. And there are unique elements that come into SMSFs, and therefore, from an advice point of view, we want to be able to make sure that we can service the requirements of what trustees and or members need. And there's a distinction in those two things too, of course, in the way that advice is provided. So I think if we're going to be moving to becoming a profession and having professional standards that underpin this, the advisors will want to make sure you can kind of see a North Star there, and then make sure we're moving to that North Star. And I guess, there's a few quick wins in here, but are we kind of looking at our North Star yet? And that to me said, that's the unknown at this stage, because there are other things now that the Minister, Stephen Jones, is saying, well, we want to go back and consult a bit further on this, and we want to go and consult a bit. And it's like, all right, well, how much further?
Long?
How long's a piece of string? And, so do we actually have our North Star yet that allows us to get there? Yep, let's get all the quick wins we need to. But there are people, and he's said it, there are the cohort that are moving into this baby boomer generation, moving into and needing advice. There are just not enough people there to be able to facilitate that. And therefore, firms need the clarity that they need to be able to look at systems, understand how many clients that they can take on board, all those things. So I think, so I come back to that North Star, and I don't think we're quite there at that point yet.
Definitely not. And we IFA hosted the Advisor Innovation Summit a few weeks ago, and we had, for example, a few digital providers there who had been sort of really, eagerly awaiting this QAR response because, for example, Aberdeen, they said, if all the 22 recommendations are adopted, we're pretty much happy to come into Australia straight away because they've got a presence here, but it's not so broad, obviously. And then we spoke once the government had delivered its response, and they sort of said, oh, no, this is not good enough. Like all the personal advice, the good advice, all those elements that Stephen has said we have to consult on further. And then it's also, like you said, how long is this going to take?
Yeah.
Like the government's now said by the end of the year, and the report, like Michelle started her job in March last year. It's just, we're all a little bit fatigued.
Yeah.
People need certainty, especially advisors. Like there's been a lot of, ups and downs, obviously. It's just, and how many more people are going to leave the industry while we keep consulting and consulting, just needs to.
Yeah. And I think from that point of view, this whole expansion to retirement income advice, I get the importance of that. And we, of course, had the retirement income review that highlighted the issues, and a lot of that highlighted the purpose, legislating the objective of super as well. But in SMSF land, we've got more than 40% of members now already in retirement phase. So these are issues that are quite mature in the SMSF sector and need the level of advice and support to work people through these issues, and not having the number of advisors in the industry and to see the drop off has really created some big holes, not only generally, but very specifically to the SMSF advice space. And therefore, I go back to that comment about the accountants before, where there is opportunities to try and address some of these issues from a strategic point of view. And maybe the ALRC will look at some of that more generally. But yeah, that to me, I'm wearing an accountant hat there, but of course, but I think, with a level, and the SMSF Association said this for some time, recognise the level of specialisation and the role that specialisation can play in an advice process. You don't go to your GP to say, yes, I think you've torn your ACL, and then he pulls out the scalpel and starts doing all the surgery on you, right?
Well, that would be scary.
But you know what I mean? It's those sort of concepts that we've spoken about for a long time, but we don't seem to be getting anywhere with those.
Yeah, that's true. And how do you actually, just talking about the experience, at the same time as the government sort of released this 2 days later, we saw Jones actually submit into Parliament the experience pathway. I haven't spoken to you about that before. How do you feel about that? Obviously, there was a whole period of consultation, but it doesn't seem that he's taken any of the actual responses on board, because quite a few of the bodies have, had their recommendations ignored. So how do you feel?
Well, you'll get it when I say this. Being in the SMSF industry with the $3 million cap, that was a very similar outcome. So in terms of consultation and then what happened in terms of release of the budget. So it's a bit of
a trend.
Yes, there's very much a trend in it as well. So, yeah, I mean, to me, I think it goes back to that comment I made with the specialisation piece before. So there are elements of it that, we got to kind of stop the bleeding in terms of people that have been leaving the industry and some level of recognised experience and expertise there in their eyes is relevant. And obviously it was pushed fairly aggressively for that. But again, I come back to in the SMSF context, we need suitably skilled people. We need the surgeons of this industry to be able to do the surgery that is required. And even more importantly, as we come up to in 2025, this proposed $3 million measure, we simply won't have enough surgeons to do the work that will need to be done, which therefore means clients end up in either being not advised or they end up in a situation whereby they're getting advice from someone who's not qualified to do so.
Or advice.
Yeah. And the scope, and it may be that, there's advisors that could be able to do it, but they're not covered under their AFSL, or you've got others that are trying to tell them what to do, but the accountant's going, well, I can't tell you what to do, but, factually, this is the way that it would need to actually work, which, they're crossing lines where they shouldn't be in the first place. So, yes, I think to answer your question in a very long-winded way, it comes back to this getting the pitch right from a specialisation point of view. Experience is relevant, but acknowledging what role people play within certain parts of the industry, I think, is probably even more important.
We've had I think a good first episode with me as a host.
Yes, it's been great, Keith. So thank you. I look forward to working with you around the SMSF Advisor Show. So what was sort of the key takeaway from you from today's session?
I think the big one was the first topic that we touched on, the NALI consultation. It certainly sounds like it's going to be, well, as with every consultation that's happened recently, very contentious and should be interesting to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to just getting clarity around that. And I think, in the discussion we have with Mayor as well, the reality is we're getting some rubber hitting the road in respect to the QAR, but, the fact that there is so much more water to go under the bridge and a level of frustration potentially that we're hearing from within the industry, that we might be going back into another period of consultation around this and that, I guess, fatigue setting in as well. Yeah, it's kind of feels like it's just dragging on and on and on. Maybe not as long as the gnarly stuff, though, because that has been going on since 2016. So, anyway, we'll wait and see. So, as is always...
Consultations on consultations.
Yes, correct. So, as is always the way, if people have got any suggestions on speakers, topics, what they'd like to hear about, how can they get in contact with us?
Right. They can send anything through to editor@smsfadvisor.com.au and we'll love to hear from you.
Excellent. Well, thank you once again for joining us with this week's SMSF Advisor Show. I hope you have a great week and look forward to you joining again in a fortnight's time. Take care and bye for now.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.